All right, so we all know just how important it is to get those new medicines out there, especially for the people who really need them, and fast, right? But sometimes it feels like the traditional ways of testing new drugs, especially in those initial phases, it's kind of like we're stuck.
Yeah.
We have to stick to a rigid plan, even when the data is like waving its hand saying, hey, there's a better way to do this. So for you, the listeners, the ones who always want to learn things efficiently, cut to the chase. Well, a deep dive, this is going to be right up your alley. We're tackling a real game changer.
You got it. Today, we're going deep, really deep, into adaptive designs in those early clinical trials. And we've got a whole stack of material here about, drug development, all the regulations. It can get pretty dense, so our mission today, to pull out the real gems, the core knowledge about how these innovative trial designs can make those early testing phases way more efficient. Because let's face it, no one wants to waste time when it comes to potentially life-saving treatments.
You're speaking my language. Efficiency is key. So break it down for us. Adaptive trial designs, what's the big idea?
Okay, imagine this. Instead of setting everything in stone at the very beginning of a trial, you build in some flexibility points, right? So you can make changes based on the data that's coming in as the study goes along. Basically, you're creating a trial that learns as it goes. Pretty cool, huh?
It's like a trial that evolves. That's got to be way better than just sticking to the old rigid plan. So throughout this deep dive, I'm guessing we'll be getting into the nitty-gritty of how these trials adapt, right? Examples from the real world, all that good stuff.
Exactly. We'll dig into the specifics, pull in some relevant examples from those sources you shared, and of course we'll touch on the all-important regulatory aspects. The FDA, the ICH, got to make sure everything's above board. Our aim, to give you a clear picture of this whole adaptive design thing without getting bogged down in the weeds.
Sounds good to me. Now, to kick things off, let's talk about how these adaptive designs, how they actually compare to those traditional fixed designs. The ones that are kind of like, well, fixed, no room for change.
Great question. So picture a traditional fixed design. Everything is set from the get-go. How many people you're going to include in the trial, the doses of the drug, who gets to participate, all of it. And that's how it stays throughout the entire trial. No wiggle room. An adaptive design, though, it's like you're building in these checkpoints where you can look at the data and say, okay, based on what we're seeing, maybe we should tweak this or that. It's about being smart and making adjustments along the way.
So it's almost like building in a little bit of that choose-your-own-adventure aspect to the trial, but based on real hard data, not just like flipping a coin.
You got it. And there are a bunch of ways these trials can be designed to adapt. Take, for example, how we figure out the right dose of a drug. I'm sure you've heard of the classic 3+3 design, often used for those early cancer drug trials.
Yeah, vaguely.
Well, our source material on phase 1 and 2 trials, it goes into this 3+3 design. It basically involves testing a low dose in 3 patients. If none of them have any serious bad reactions, you bump up the dose for the next 3. If one patient has a really bad reaction, then you bring in 3 more at the same dose. And if 2 or more have severe toxicity, well, that dose is a no-go. It's considered too high.
Right, so very step-by-step. Not much room for, well, adapting. So how does an adaptive approach change things up? How does it improve on finding the right dose?
Well, think of it this way. An adaptive design for dose finding, it can be way more dynamic. Instead of those fixed groups of 3, it adjusts the number of patients at each dose level based on how safe the drug seems to be based on the data. And what's really cool, it can use these statistical models, right, to predict the chances of toxicity at different doses, taking into account the data from all the patients so far. This way, we might be able to find that maximum tolerated dose, the highest dose that's still safe, much quicker, and importantly, with fewer patients overall. It's like using a GPS to navigate that dose-finding journey.
That's really fascinating. So you're using all this incoming data to basically steer the ship, to make those dose adjustments as you go along. Now, I'm curious, what else can we adapt in a trial?
Well, another critical piece of the puzzle is something called sample size adjustment. You see, in a traditional trial, you figure out how many participants you need right at the beginning. And this is based on wanting to have enough statistical power. Basically, the ability to confidently say, hey, this drug really works if it truly does. But here's the thing. As the trial goes on and you start to see some early results, you might realize that the drug is either working much better than you thought or maybe not as well as you hoped.
And I'm guessing that can really impact how many people you actually need in the study to get a clear answer.
Yeah. Exactly, and that's where adaptive designs shine. They can build in these pre-planned checkpoints, interim analyses where you take a look at the data. If it looks like the treatment is a home run, really effective, you might be able to reduce the number of participants you initially planned for. And you can still have enough data to confidently say whether or not it works. On the other hand, if the drug's effect seems a little, well, underwhelming, you might have the option to increase the sample size, bring in more people to make sure you can actually detect a real difference if one exists. This way, you avoid having way too many people in the trial when you don't need them, or not having enough to get a clear picture. Efficiency all around.
It makes total sense. You're being smart with your resources and, importantly, with the patients who are taking part in these trials. Now, what about those different treatment options? Can adaptive designs help us narrow down which ones are worth pursuing?
Absolutely. In some of those early phase trials, you might be testing a few different treatments at once, or maybe slightly different versions of the same treatment. And guess what? An adaptive design can be set up to drop any treatments that are clearly not working. At those pre-planned checkpoints where you're analyzing the data, this way, all the effort, the money, the patients, everything gets focused on the treatments that show real promise. Fail fast, move on, and put those resources where they count.
Like a little competition within the trial, and the data helps you pick the winners early on. I like it.
That's a great way to think about it. And there's another really cool adaptation. It's called patient population enrichment. Sometimes you might find that a treatment works really well for a specific group of patients, but not so much for
Oh,
others.
I see. Like maybe a certain gene makes some people respond better to a drug.
That's a perfect example. With an adaptive design, you can collect data on those biomarkers, those genetic markers, from the first patients in the trial. And if that interim analysis shows that people with a certain biomarker are the ones who really benefit, well, you can adjust the trial to enroll more patients from that specific group. This makes it more likely that you'll be able to prove the drug works in the people who actually benefit from it. And it sets the stage for more personalized, targeted treatments in the future. That's the direction we want to be heading in, right?
Absolutely. Personalized medicine is a huge deal. Now, are there any other adaptations we should be aware of?
Just one more, and it's a little less common. It's called endpoint modification. Basically, in some cases, the early data might suggest that the way you're measuring the drug's effect, that endpoint, isn't the best one. Maybe there's a different way to measure it that would give you a clearer picture. Now, changing the endpoint mid-trial, it's not a decision to be taken lightly. You got to be super careful with the statistics to make sure the trial is still valid. But it is a potential adaptation you might see in some adaptive designs.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about how adaptive designs can adjust the dose, the sample size, the treatments being tested, the patient population, even the endpoint. Now, I remember you mentioned using our source materials, but while those sources might not give us specific examples of recent adaptive trials, can we still see those core principles of adaptive design kind of woven in to the broader ideas in those materials?
Oh, for sure. It's all connected. For instance, you'll notice a big theme across several of those sources. They all talk about how crucial it is to make drug development more efficient, less time, less money, especially those books from season 2 and season 3 about developing cancer drugs. They really highlight how costly and time-consuming it can be to get new cancer treatments to the people who desperately need them. Adaptive designs, they directly address this issue. They give us a way to streamline that early research phase, make it more informative, faster. If we can get solid data quicker and with fewer resources, well, that's a win for everyone.
I'm with you there. Any way to speed up the process of getting new treatments to people while still making sure they're safe and effective, that's a good thing.
Exactly. And if you look at that anti-cancer drug development guide we have, they specifically call out PKPD-guided dose escalation as being a very attractive approach. Now, this might not be a full-blown adaptive design with all those formal decision rules, but it's still using the same fundamental idea. It's about using the data you're gathering, about how the drug moves through the body and what it does to make smart adjustments during the trial. It's all about letting the data guide your decisions.
I see. So even before we had this formal framework for adaptive designs, researchers were already recognizing that, hey, using real-time data to inform those next steps, that's a smart way to go.
Exactly. And then if we look at the clinical trials handbook, they talk about interim analyses, but mainly in the context of those later stage phase 3 trials. But again, it shows that fundamental idea of using the data you're collecting to make big decisions about the study. Like, should we stop the trial early because the drug's a clear winner or a clear loser? Should we make other changes to the protocol? Adaptive designs, they essentially bring this same approach, this idea of using interim data to make decisions, into those earlier phases of research, the exploratory ones. But the difference is they build in that flexibility from the very beginning. It's like planning for the unexpected in a smart way.
Makes sense. Now, a huge part of any clinical trial is all the regulations, right? So how do those big regulatory bodies like the FDA and ICH, how do they feel about these adaptive designs? Anything specific we should know about?
Well, it's super important to understand that even though these adaptive designs offer a lot of flexibility and efficiency, they still got to play by the same rules as any other clinical trial. The FDA, they're the ones who review and approve all trial designs, including these adaptive ones. And they're generally open to innovative approaches, things that could speed up drug development. But, and this is a big but, those designs have to be scientifically sound. They can't cut corners. They got to make sure the results of the trial are still reliable.
So it's not like you can just say, oh, we're feeling spontaneous, let's change things up mid-trial.
No way. There are rules, there are expectations. One of the key principles of these adaptive designs is something called pre-specification. And that basically means that any potential changes, what can be changed, what data you're going to use to decide whether to make a change, the statistical methods you're going to use, all of that, it has to be spelled out in the trial protocol before the trial even starts. No surprises. This is super important to make sure there's no bias creeping in and that the results of the trial are trustworthy, like that you can actually believe what the data is telling you. And if you look at our sources on trial design, like the Practical Guide and Fundamentals, they're always stressing how crucial it is to have a detailed protocol and to stick to it. And with adaptive designs, well, that becomes even more important.
It's like having a roadmap, but a roadmap that includes different routes depending on what you find along the way. But you still need that map from the start. Okay, what about those ICH guidelines? Where do they fit in?
Well, the ICH guidelines, as we saw in those Season 5 materials, they're all about making sure the regulatory standards are the same across the board internationally. It's about making sure those medicines are safe, they work, and they're high quality no matter where you are in the world. Now, you might not find a specific section in those guidelines that's all about adaptive designs, but the core ideas they're focused on, things like good data, patient safety, ethical research, all of that applies to adaptive trials as well. So anyone doing these adaptive trials, they got to follow all those relevant ICH guidelines, for conducting the trial, monitoring it, reporting the results, all of it. Those guidelines, they're there to make sure that even with all the flexibility that adaptive designs offer, the trial is still done in a way that's scientifically and ethically sound. No compromises there.
I see. So the regulators, they're definitely on board with the potential of these adaptive designs, but they want to make sure that everything is planned out carefully, the statistics are solid, and the ethics are impeccable right from the get-go.
You got it. It's all about that pre-specification. It keeps everyone honest, It shows that the researchers aren't just making things up as they go along.
Makes sense. So big picture, what are those main advantages of adaptive designs that we've talked about, just to sum it all up?
Sure. The biggest wins with adaptive designs are all about being more efficient. They give you a chance to find those effective doses quicker, to use your resources wisely by adjusting the number of people in the trial, to drop those treatments that are clearly duds early on, and to really zero in on the patients who are most likely to benefit. And at the end of the day, that efficiency means we can potentially get those life-saving treatments out there faster. And that ties back to what we talked about at the very beginning, right? About wanting to learn things quickly and efficiently. Well, adaptive designs, they can help us do just that.
And that efficiency probably helps with the costs too, right? Bringing those costs down.
Absolutely. Saving time, saving money, those are huge benefits. But it's important to remember that adaptive designs, they're not a walk in the park. They need a lot of careful planning, some pretty sophisticated statistical analysis, and they got to be executed flawlessly.
They sound like incredibly powerful tools, but they definitely require some serious expertise to do them right. So, as we wrap up, any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I want you to think about this. We're living in a time where we have more and more real-time data at our fingertips. And those tools for analyzing that data, they're getting more sophisticated all the time. So imagine how this could change early phase trials even more. Maybe we'll see designs that adapt even faster, maybe even using AI, machine learning, to optimize trials in real time. It's a really exciting thought, and it builds on those conversations we've had about the role of AI in drug development. The possibilities are huge.
That's mind-blowing. AI guiding those clinical trials, making them even smarter. The future of drug development is looking pretty amazing. Well, I want to thank you for joining me on this deep dive into adaptive designs. It's been a fascinating conversation.
The pleasure was all mine. Keep exploring this whole world of drug development, all the amazing innovations that are happening. There's always something new to learn.